Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode. Introduction, who are we and what are we doing?
Sarah, what movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about The Naked Civil Servant, starring John Hurt as Quentin Crisp. And Rena, can you give us a trigger warning?
Trigger warning. This movie contains depictions of homophobia, men wearing lipstick, men wearing eyeshadow, shabby, genteel 1970s British production standards, gay men discriminating against other gay men for being too gay, people saying the word homosexual in a manner demonstrating that they think that there is something wrong with that, unemployment, suicide, severely unappetizing food, hair dye that makes no effort to look natural, poverty, John Hurt's pasty body, World War II, violence, off-camera sexual assault, men wearing nail polish, violence, prostitution, men wearing rouge, mental illness, the Great Depression, negligent housekeeping, queer icons settling for unimpressive romantic partners, 1970s British screen ratios that may be somewhat disconcerting to the eyes of audiences living in the 2020s, rotting apples, and overly fabulous epigrams.
Rena, can you please give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Some of the sources used in this episode include the internet and the book version of The Naked Civil Servant by Quentin Crisp, Quentin Crisp, The Profession of Being by Nigel Kelly.
Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about Quentin Crisp and The Naked Civil Servant?
Of course. This is from our friends at Wikipedia. Quentin Crisp, born Dennis Charles Pratt, born on Christmas Day in 1908 and died on November 21st, 1999, was an English raconteur whose work in the public eye included a memoir of his life and various media appearances. Before becoming well-known, he was an artist's model, hence the title of this movie and his groundbreaking memoir, The Naked Civil Servant. He afterwards became a gay icon due to his flamboyant personality, fashion sense, and wit. And he really was a true pioneer in terms of the way he made it okay for young British boys, in particular, to explore flamboyance and gender identity and homosexuality. Everyone from Boy George to Judas Priest's Rob Halford has cited him as an inspiration for their own, self-discovery and the journeys that they went on and the identities that they tried on. And at the end of his life, Quentin Crisp reflected that he was probably transgender, and that if he were much younger than 90, he would have liked to embrace that identity and the healthcare protocols that would have made it possible. He said this: having labeled myself homosexual and having been labeled as such by the wider world, I have effectively lived a gay life for most of my years. Consequently, I can relate to gay men because I have more or less been one for so long, in spite of my actual fate being that of a woman trapped in a man's body. I refer to myself as homosexual without thinking because of how I have lived my life. If you are reading this and are gay, think of me as one of your own, even though you now know the truth. If it's confusing for you, think of how confusing it has been for me these past 90 years. And about the movie, The Naked Civil Servant is a 1975 made-for-TV biographical comedy drama film directed by Jack Gold and produced by Verity Lambert. It was adapted for film by Philip Mackey based on Quentin Crisp's 1968 book. Movie stars John Hurt, Patricia Hodge, and John Rhys-Davies. And it was produced by Thames Television and originally broadcast on December 17, 1975 on ITV in Great Britain, 1976, it was shown in the US on WOR and PBS. For his performance, John Hurt won the BAFTA for Best Actor in 1976. And the production also won the 1976 Prix Italia. Film continues to be very influential and consequential. In 2000, the film was placed fourth in a poll by entertainment industry professionals to the best films from Great Britain of the 20th century. And really, this is a movie that is more about the power of Quentin Crisp as a writer and a storyteller, and also about John Hurt as an actor. A review from the Los Angeles Free Press in 1977 said, "It is well that Hurt's performance is preserved on film, for it is an extraordinary achievement. Dignity is the core of Hurt's characterization, a dignity that turns every negative situation towards the positive." John Hurt reprised the role of Quentin Crisp in 2008 in the film An Englishman in New York, which covered the time after this film came out and how he experienced celebrity. And Quentin Crisp was very pleased with how John Hurt interpreted him. He called him his representative here on Earth. Sting's song An Englishman in New York is written about Quentin Crisp. Also, during filming of this, it was discovered that John Hurt had actually painted Quentin Crisp when he was a life studies model at the art school that John Hurt attended.
One of those portraits done by a student in one of the classes he posed for is his portrait in the National Portrait Gallery in Britain now. I don't believe it's one of the naked ones. The Naked Civil Servant was produced by Verity Lambert, who I want to give a shout out to because she is a trailblazing female producer. She is the mother of Doctor Who, which is now a 60-year-old franchise and a multi-generational institution in Britain. She had a high-profile, high-impact career with over 4 decades as a producer in Britain, beginning in the early 1960s. And her record as an ally avant la lettre is very good. The director of the first Doctor Who serial from 1963, Waris Hussein, was gay and would go on to lose a partner in the AIDS crisis in the 1980s. And she worked very closely with Waris Hussein on early Doctor Who and on subsequent projects.
I think that is a great shout out to give to Verity Lambert, and well deserved. This is, I mean, this is a fascinating relic.
It is. It was revolutionary for its time. Unfortunately, I am spoiled by 21st century production standards, so it looks very stagey. And I can see Verity Lambert doing one of the things she did well, which was to do the best that she could do on a low production budget, where the sets look like they could be on a stage and then someone filmed them. And it almost made me miss CGI just a little bit, but not really.
It's a great credit to the training that British actors get. Also, that they are able to do these shoestring budget productions and make them sound and look so wonderful.
This movie has a lot of actors who they all feel like I've seen their face before because they were on my parents' Masterpiece Theatre tapes, but also they're from what I call the RSC BBC pipeline, which includes actors who went to Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. And later we will get to it. So, welcome to the show, John Hurt. We will be seeing you again. I realized that the reason I thought I had seen him before was because he played Caligula in I, Claudius, which you should not confuse with Caligula, the movie that we did in the currently lost 3rd episode. But my images of him and Malcolm McDowell are kind of toga tangled because I have these images of both of them dressed as Caligula, and also John Rhys-Davies, who I should no more mess up his name with Jonathan Rhys-Meyers than I should confuse Emma Stone and Emma Roberts, but I keep hearing myself starting to do that. He was Macro in the I, Claudius that ran in the 70s.
And a star of the Indiana Jones series.
Yes, which he did in Brownface.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's canceled now. He, in 2015, complained about political correctness and Christianity being wiped out.
Oh, so he was being a geezer.
So he did that. But on a lighter note, Sir John Hurt is part of your pipeline of RADA to BBC. We will see him again, but he's like just a spectacular actor. He worked constantly. Like he was a true working actor, but also brought a lot of really memorable performances to the screen. I have a favorite John Hurt performance, which is him in Heaven's Gate. He currently, or at least as of the printing on the internet on IMDb again, holds the record for the most on-screen character deaths, 47 in total. But I would imagine that Tony Goldwyn, who dies on screen all the time, and then also Eric Roberts, just by virtue of quantity, are probably on his tail.
I learned that John Hurt was married to a woman. In fact, he married women 4 times. There's a conversation that I realize we've been having that could be a new segment called A Bouquet of Caveats for You, that we also sort of cover in the trigger warning. So for the time that The Naked Civil Servant was released into, it was revolutionary. It was in there with An American Family and The Boys in the Band, among the first examples of mass market filmmaking contemplating the possibility that OMG, gay people are human beings.
It's interesting because like we dipped a toe out into treating gay people like they were human beings, and then like the 80s happened and we were like, JK, they're jokes. And we really saw like kind of like the lasting mainstreaming of gay culture in American media was kind of like introduced by like making these characters really sexless, despite being people who have relationships and sex and love and all of the things that heterosexual people have. I always think of Patton Oswalt has a bit about auditioning for a role where he was playing the gay best friend. And he's talking about how every line is like, you need some Pinot and some microwave popcorn stat. And I feel like we had a lot of those in the 90s, even when they were the lead characters, like in Will and Grace. I feel like there was like a sexlessness to it. Like where it was a character who was filled with wisdom, who supported the heterosexual leads and had no inner life, but maybe might like stage a makeover. It seems like we'll see what happens right now in the year of our Lord 2025. It seems like there's sort of a general acceptance of gay people having dimensions, which is great. Congratulations, everybody. We did it. I'm being really sarcastic here.
But in with the A Bouquet of Caveats for You, an apologia for those characters. I don't like that those GBF characters were, that we ever lived in a society where they were an intermediate there, but I've thought about the role that those characters played in bringing America around, even though it never should have been a thing. I think GBF characters that make us cringe now at the time were a step towards inclusion and showing gay people integrated into mainstream society. As a show that deals with the past and wants to cover the full century plus of filmmaking, we often have films that show outdated attitudes and films that were revolutionary at the time and now step on the toes of current consensus.
We're going to talk longer than this movie. This movie had me at 2 things. So John Hurt, not William Hurt, and it's 77 minutes long, which makes it like 2 hours shorter than any given episode of the final season of Sons of Anarchy. This is a quick in and out movie. This thing moves. You could stuff 3 of this movie into Ray.
John Hurt delivers on the pathos with dignity in the time that he's working in. He has a lot on his shoulders to deliver on here because he's carrying the whole film. He plays Quentin Crisp from adolescence to what at the time was old age and what we would now call late middle age, which is around, I guess he wrote around 1968. So his mid 60s.
Oh, I want to just take a moment on his Wikipedia where his job title is raconteur, which is the Latin for storyteller. And I am jealous of this career.
So we open on an intro from the real Quentin Crisp.
And immediately I was just like, oh, you're exhausting. But also beyond that, really like a deeply original and creative person, and was from the jump, which must have been incredibly difficult.
Well, like Andy Warhol, he had a career as a commercial artist. I suspect that he did whatever the bare minimum was to earn income, and it's amazing to me the amounts of money that they quote as what you could get by on, because there's one part where he's like, yeah, I just made £2 this week, and they all act like he's in the money.
And we see right away, like we cut to his childhood where we see him dancing in the mirror, ballet dancing, and it's displeasing to his family.
Yeah, but he's like in kind of a dream state. It only occurred to me long after I watched this, like, oh no, inner child. But I think because it goes through so quickly, and because it's only called back once, and because this came out so long before, it doesn't feel like it's part of a template.
You mentioned like the dream state. In a way, there's sort of an emotional distance he has from himself, that humor is probably the tool that protects him from getting in too deep with himself sometimes, because like some of the things that we see him experience in this movie are terrifying.
Oh, yeah. And they make humor of it. But when you think about the sheer amount that he went through, or that gay people dealt with back then and still deal with in a lot of countries around this world, it is horrifying.
Yeah. And that is his prerogative as the storyteller. But also, it's interesting to see that juxtaposition of using humor to kind of protect himself essentially from daily gay bashing.
Daily degradation, if you want alliteration on it. The script is very talky, which is something you often see in things where they do not have as much budget to show versus tell. The screen ratio of British TV at the time, it takes a visual readjustment. They use these screen cards for his epigrams at some point that kind of remind me of silent film a little, which, again, when Quentin Crisp was born, the feature-length film hadn't been created yet.
When I was watching this, I had a very difficult time adjudicating it as film, because it feels more like an audiobook with a lot of visuals. The closest way I could describe it is it feels like a talking graphic novel, because it uses a lot of narration, and uses a lot of him talking in narration and then cutting to the scene and then talking, then narration. And I remember it very specifically in the late 90s and early 2000s, where it seemed like films were really overly reliant on narration. And I get a little Laurence Olivier, like, it's called Acting My Boy about it, where I'm like, it's a film, find a way to show me. But this movie makes a very deliberate choice that it is going to tell me, and it's going to tell me with narration and straight text. And with, with the distance that humor allows him to take as an observer of his own life.
And it's Quentin Crisp. Like, why would you give up an epigram? Why would you give up the possibility of just having someone say anything that he said? He was a deeply verbal person.
It is a very and then-y movie, but it's also an incredibly intimate movie. It is a good illustration of how you can take content with such a strong voice and integrate that strong voice with the action on screen. This is very naturally assembled, and it sets it up sort of as he kind of shows like some of the lessons he learned in life and illustrates them with events that would have resulted in him learning them. You know, like the first being like sex is not a good replacement for masturbation. Exhibitionism is a drug, which we all know. And we see him, you know, talking to his parents, and his parents are just sort of like, what even are you? Like, what planet are you from? And I was thinking about what would that have been like to have him as a kid, not even like the gay part, but just he was a show. He was a living, walking show.
So he's in, I guess, late adolescence at the start of it. So we see him interacting with his parents, and we see him like in the bathtub where he would take very long baths. And he's in art school. He gets picked up on the street for the first time and taken to a coffee house where he meets other gay men. And I am once again in awe of pre-Stonewall gaydar.
Yeah, what a dangerous business it was to try and find other people in your boat in that era, because I bet you could sniff someone out and maybe they weren't at a place where they were prepared to be talking about it or in denial about it, and you could probably get yourself into a lot of, you know, like into a lot of very dangerous situations when you are trying to just connect with the world.
In this case, the man who picks him up on the street is wearing makeup and they have similar mannerisms. And when he takes him to the coffee house, they give him a tube of lipstick and he puts it on for the first time like it's a sacrament. But I cannot tell if I'm being hit on unless the other person literally grabs me like by the arm so that there's an indentation, like when you look at the Bernini statue of Hades abducting Persephone, where you see that indentation of his fingers in her thigh. Unless someone grabs me like that by the arm and says, "Look here, I like you, go out with me," I cannot figure out if I am being hit upon. So the operation of pre-Stonewall gaydar is pretty amazing to me.
We also see him at university, and he has himself a drab ass hag with a name that rhymes with that up front, which I will not say. And some things never change. Since time immemorial, fabulous gay men have found bland women to hang out with.
So her name is given in the credits as art student. In real life, her name was Pat, and all of the other characters in this sort of just, the actors get the assignment, but they know that their job is to be little planets in orbit around the sun that is Quentin, and to compliment, not upstage him, but they don't have names. Their names are art student, Mr. Pole, Mrs. Pole. And yeah, I also had trouble keeping track of the other characters in this, and I hate that rhyming term that you're referring to, because starting in high school, I often preferred the friendship of gay men to girls because I could talk with them about the things that I would have talked about with female friends, but without having to put up with the 10,000 insane little social nuances that you have to understand to conduct conversation among women, most of which continue to baffle me.
I'm sensitive to the fact that it's not a word that people say anymore. And I am also sensitive to my own proximity to being the unattractive girl who hung out with gay guys who were all probably lying to her about being fabulous. And I just want to note here, do all of you people who are grateful to not be canceled for using mean words hear how easy it is for us to just not use that word and still be thoughtful? It's really impressive, right?
You could say that we put it in their heads by referring to it, but we also know where that came from, and screw that guy. And also, Verity Lambert signed off on this as the producer. This movie was produced by a woman who treasured her friendships and working relationships with gay men, beginning in a time not too far removed from what we're seeing here. Art student, she had polio, so we see her dragging a leg, and she's rather plain, but she turns out to be quite deep later, as we'll see.
We see him interacting with the police, who are naturally terrible to him and to other gay men.
Quentin Crisp should get a verse in Fuck the Police.
Oh my God. I want it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Someone get. I'm like trying to figure out how we make this happen, since he's dead and John Hurt is dead, but there must be someone who can imitate Quentin Crisp, who could do like a guest verse.
I would love to have a version of Fuck the Police where they're recording and Quentin Crisp just drops in and does a verse. Because it's the same oppression.
It's the same harassment. It's the same getting in their faces kind of like energy that's really upsetting. And he talks about the rules of how you walk around, and you want to make sure that you're backlit so they can't see your face really well to identify you. It's just the rules for getting around in the world as Quentin Crisp or as a gay man in the 20s and 30s in the UK are pretty depressing. And I'm sure that continued until like 6 months ago, and now it's starting up again. We also see them interact with a group of thugs, and he refers to them as gentlemen, and they're like, "We're not gentlemen, we're from Oxton." And when I was watching it, I heard Boston, and I stand by that this is also accurate.
They didn't have Boston accents.
I realize this, but I thought they said Boston anyway.
I believe that men like this are currently referred to as yobs in the UK, but I could be off on that. So it's almost played for comedy when he's talking about, this practical guide to how to walk around. And it's scary and it's horrifying. And you also see him playing with his appearance and evolving visually into Quentin Crisp. He moves in with Thumbnails, his first boyfriend, who seems like a pain. This is mainly so that he can escape from his parents. He has a number of romantic partners throughout the film that are just awful, and I feel bad that he couldn't have been born into a better time when he would have had more choices.
Like, if he had Grindr, can you imagine? One of the things I also found out about him when I was reading about him is that he kept his phone number listed in the UK, and then when he moved to America, he continued to keep his phone number in the phone book. Like, you could have. So for the young people listening, gather around for a moment. We used to have this thing called the phone book. You used it to call people, and Quentin Crisp kept his name in there. So you could have walked up to a phone booth, which used to be a place where the phones were, and open the phone book and find Crisp Q and call it, and he would pick up the phone if he was home. And if you invited him to dinner, he expected you to pay, but he would go to dinner with you and sing for his supper. He would entertain you and tell stories. In the 90s, baby Rena could have gotten on a payphone and used the phone book and called Quentin Crisp and asked him out for a meal.
There's a very, very narrow window of time where baby Rena or baby Sarah could have done that.
Right?
Yeah.
So sad. And anyone out there listening who is younger than us doesn't understand a thing we just said.
Well, I did once sprain my ankle by falling. I was standing on a phone book while drunk. So it's probably better that we got rid of phone books because they injured people.
Yeah. That is a good reason to have gotten rid of them. And I think what's also really amazing about this movie is that because of the time span in which he lived, he essentially can tell the entire 20th century gay experience.
It's only a few decades later, and they're quite far underground.
They're all just like so pretty.
Well, they're all putting themselves in danger to live authentically, which is a sacrifice.
I think, as I said, like, he tells it with a lot of humor and self-effacement, but I can't believe he survived. I can't believe anybody survived.
It seems like he gets beaten up and is in danger so often, and he was a sex worker for a time. He talks about like the amount of money he talks about making, he gives in shillings, which were part of this crazy British monetary system before, where there were 240 pence in a pound and a certain number of shillings within a pound, but I don't know if it was still a thing then, but there was a unit of currency, I think it was called a guinea, that was a pound plus a shilling. So if you were working in a British store, you had to be able to do math if someone gave you like a certain number of guineas in pounds. There's also something called a crown and a half crown, and it all adds up bizarrely. Although defenders of it said that it made it very easy to split the bill a number of different ways on account of there being 240 of the thing, so it could divide by 3 or 6 or 12. But yes, the amounts of money that he mentions getting paid as a sex worker are within those units of currency.
Nope, hard pass on that monetary system.
The sun never sets on the British shilling until it does.
Oh, thank goodness. It's like our American way of measuring things. Like none of it makes any sense.
Americans will switch to the metric system when each and every American drops dead.
If some progressive president did do it, like the next one would like symbolically rip off all the signs that listed things in centimeters and be like, we're an inches country, everybody. And everyone would be so excited because they would be canceling something.
Part of how Jimmy Carter became a one-term president was by trying to coax the metric system in.
Yeah, he supported the gradual transition to the metric system in the U.S. following the Metric Conversion Act of 1975. He helped establish the U.S. Metric Board to implement the transition and advocated for voluntary gradual conversion over at least 10 years.
Oh my gosh, and that is how Ronald Reagan got to destroy the Great Society, because Jimmy Carter had to go and mess with the inch.
It's that tribalism, like anything that my counterpart does is evil.
Yeah, I remember when the French will quit smoking before Americans go to the metric system was a joke? It isn't anymore.
The French will quit smoking before we do anything that isn't troglodytic in this country.
So we see Quentin gets a real job so that he can leave Thumbnails, who has been so annoying, just horrendous. And we see, like, while he's on his way to interview for this job, someone stomps on his foot because he's wearing red nail polish. It seems like he landed jobs because his mother knew people. And I guess that commercial art was one of those places that had a little bit more space. And then we see a woman throw herself at him for a pseudo Boston marriage where he had close friendships with women, but she's saying, but I love you. And he says, so you're imagining that we'll read poetry to each other and they'll just not be sex. And he says, but like, no, I'm a man who wants to be with other men. And I guess I feel like this woman is someone who today would identify as asexual but romantic, or as demisexual, because she wants all of the delicious accoutrements of the coupledom, but doesn't care about sex.
I do think that being in a Boston marriage with Quentin Crisp would be challenging as a woman, because you want to talk about a relationship where you're literally sharing the mirror with someone.
Well, he would steal your makeup. He'd probably use your mascara and give you pink eye. He hates to clean. He also hates to hold a job down. So you'd have to be able to have a cleaning lady on your own. So basically, if you are a woman supporting Quentin Crisp within a Boston marriage, you're kind of paying for entertainment.
You're getting like none of the benefits of being married and all of the downfall of marriage. Like, you're doing all of the emotional labor and the physical labor, and you're going to go into your drawer and look for your pantyhose and be like, oh, my husband took them all.
He stretched them out and got runners in them.
Yep. Like, I mean, love Quentin Crisp, would love to have gone to dinner with him, would not want to share a roof with him.
No. Also, he's terrible at housekeeping. Like what he said about housekeeping was that after 4 years, the dust stops accumulating.
Yeah, that's dark.
And he never made enough to hire a cleaning person to throw all that onto, because it was just an element of life that he decided to jettison. But he talks about how he wants a great dark man.
Same girl. And also, you'd probably be fighting over men.
Well, no, because it seems like he and I have a different type. You might be fighting over a man with him.
Yeah.
I've often thought that because I'm so clueless, in another time I probably would have wound up being some gay guy's beard.
I mean, anybody could.
It doesn't sound all that bad, but I feel like those arrangements where the woman went into it eyes wide open were probably better for the woman, because it depended on the man not being able to live as his authentic self.
I feel like as much as it seems like an act of goodness, I think that has to be really like soul crushing for everyone involved.
I think that it might have been a great refuge for an asexual woman who wanted the companionship and fiscal benefits of being married, but definitely not for the gay man.
I feel like in any relationship where one person is having to hide their identity, like that seems like that would be a real strain on things. So the war comes.
But before the war comes, he gets beaten up again and his coworkers say nothing. And there's this scene where he's running from a mob of people. He hops into a cab and then the driver kicks him out of the taxi. And he makes some friends. There's a ballet studio owner and there's a character that they call the Pole, and his wife, who is a former artist's model. And the character that they call the Pole is the Czech in the book. I have no idea why the decision was made to switch his nationality from Czech to Polish, or what the situation was with what at the time was Czechoslovakia that would have made them go, yeah, let's make him Polish. But this character will be in the film for a while. Quentin walks into the kitchen in one party scene where he's happily announcing that he just made £2 that week at this job that he took to get away from thumbnails. And he walks in the kitchen to find the Pole, and who is married, making out with art student who is like plain and has a limp. And he remarks with shock, up to that moment, I thought there were no people in the world beside me, or something like that.
He's self-involved. God bless.
It's like he sees other people being complicated and having to work around them. The depression comes, he loses the commercial artist job, but he gets a job posing in art studios as a model, mostly naked, but that is where naked civil servant comes from, because he was posing at the public colleges. So it was on the government dime.
Yes. He has an amazing line in here, which is, I discovered my vocation in life, exhibitionist and martyr, which I was like, same girl. That is the vocation.
In terms of martyr, his interpretation of it is like, I am doing this to be visible, like people need to know I exist. And there's this one scene where he goes into a club and they kick him out for being too effeminate. And he says to the guy who's telling him, you have to leave, but what about the cause? And the guy just like rips up his card and is like, what cause? And I guess this is contemporary to Weimar Germany. Was the first place we know of to have laws protecting gay people, and that wasn't broadly popular. We know what happens to Weimar, and then it is over another 3 decades before any kind of like public movement really gets any steam together. But that's how he's treated by his fellows.
He gets checked for military service. He makes it very clear what they're going to be getting their hands on if he is brought in to serve.
He shows up and they're like, is your hair dyed? And he's like, yes, I am a homosexual. And they're like kind of dumbfounded by him. And the thing, he's just being perfectly honest. He's not trying to dodge the draft. He's just telling them what they'll get. And he says, well, I see men, all I've seen soldiers do is pick things up and put them on a lorry, and I'm capable of doing that. I love this interaction personally. Like this scene, this scene of him talking with the recruiters where they're just sort of like, their mouths are hanging open.
He was one, like, I'm going to be a theater major away from having a very similar conversation that I had with, well, I didn't have quite this level of conversation with the recruiter for the military who tried to get me involved. I also loved, he had a line in here too, when the war was declared, I bought 2 pounds of henna.
World War II winds up being very liberating for him because he meets all these handsome, friendly Americans.
This cracked me up, the American who was like drinking milk in bed. I was like, oh my gosh, the way that he's portraying Americans is amazing. And yeah, he's having a good time with the American soldiers, and they are very friendly.
Yeah.
So you have a note here of welcome to the show, John Rhys-Davies.
Yes, welcome to the show, John Rhys-Davies, better known as Gimli from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And he also worked with John Hurt on I, Claudius. He is playing a character called Barndoor, who becomes his boyfriend and one of the failed candidates for being the Great Dark Man. There's the revelation later. There is no Great Dark Man. It's this ideal that he had. I think that, like, one of the things here is, yes, this movie was revolutionary for the time, but I'm pretty sure this is a movie about gay men in which we never see 2 men kissing. We see men in bed together. And I'm going to assume that for any of these actors who played someone romantically involved with Quentin Crisp, it was kind of a risk for them to take that on.
Oh,
we see a very passionate heterosexual kiss between the Pole and art student. But can you remember seeing 2 men kissing in this movie about gay men? Also in here, unfortunately, I can't remember whether it's before or after Barndoor. He meets Barndoor. He gets arrested by the police for allegedly accosting people, and he goes on trial. And this is quite a tour de force that he does in the witness box.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's kind of, it is kind of this like watershed moment of, like, I can imagine watching this in 1975 and being like, oh my God, humans. It's a wonderful moment.
And he talks about, because he cannot directly accuse the cops of lying. I never speak unless spoken to. And it's just an affront to human dignity that he has to have all of these defenses that he describes. But as he's describing them, of course, there's no way that what they're talking about could have happened. And we see that. We see that the 2 cops see his deferment card and that he says, no, I'm a homosexual. But that as he walks down the street having these 3 encounters, everyone he runs into greets him. It's brief and he moves on, and that he walks very fast, and everything is evolved around survival. And it's really beautiful what he says in the box. And he also has all of his friends in as character witnesses, and the judge lets him off. I don't know why these cops need to lie, whether they're vindictive or they have a quota. But
I could speculate wildly. They're cops.
Oh!
Like, of course they're lying. Of course they have a quota to meet. Of course they're atavist monsters. They don't understand what homosexuality is, or homosexuality. And therefore they hate it.
And John Hurt, like, he has certain mannerisms or turns of speech that he repeats throughout the film. Oh God, as we're going over this scene, I so want Quentin Crisp's version, fuck the police.
AI could probably make it happen for us.
That's offensive. The AI doing that is vastly more offensive than a little old white man getting a verse in Fuck the Police.
I mean, maybe it's like a sequel to Fuck the Police with elder gay statesmen who saw Stonewall
Oh, yeah, I want Quentin to have a verse. I want Marsha P. Johnson to have a verse.
Harvey Milk. As long as we're bringing back dead people for this song.
Oh my gosh, you know what this movie also doesn't do? There's no KYG, kill your gays. No one gets martyred in this.
No, nobody dies. Well, no, that's not true.
Well, we'll get to that shortly, but it's a mental illness death that happens later in this. So his friend art student splits up with the Pole, who has started to become mentally ill and stands around talking about how someone or something called them is watching him, and she decides to go become a nun in France, reportedly because she likes to be miserable. So he goes to a mental institution, and before she goes off to become a nun, she asks him to visit the Pole. This leads to him splitting up with Barndoor, and there was something out of whack with the way they showed the relationship with Barndoor, but at the same time, it was very, very good for 1975. The Pole decides that he's in love with Quentin, and I guess becomes the last boyfriend that they show in here. In between, there was also someone referred to as the civil servant who stopped seeing him because the neighbors saw when they did it with the shades up. The Pole is old and crazy and puts cod liver oil in his hair to turn it golden, which makes me want to puke, and gives him rotting apples. All the food in this movie looks disgusting. And it's not just that it's British cooking. He brings him like melted chocolate bars and I'm sorry, this is... Can you describe the awful looking food he brings him? Because I'm getting physically ill just thinking about it.
Let's just leave it at it's gross. It's gross.
It's disgusting.
The Pole is not well.
They are lovers for a while, and then the Pole hangs himself. But that is not a case of kill your gays. Actually, it's bury your gays. There is no bury your gays in this. The Pole dies because he's mentally ill, and I'm kind of relieved for Quentin that he doesn't have to deal with the Pole bringing him disgusting food anymore, because you just look at it and it's revolting. Here you have the note, I am exhausted.
Yeah, I was just like, wow, this is quite a ride and a lot of life.
This, if it weren't for all of the epigrams, it would be incredibly depressing. Just when you look at what he has to settle for just having someone to sleep with him in that era.
Yeah, it's without
horrible.
The epigrams and without his commentary, it is like that play that they go see in The Godfather 2, where it's just like, oh look, someone's dead. Oh, and drab and dreary and depressing.
Yeah. So he runs into Thumbnails again, who tells him he looks terrible, and he realizes he's getting old. His hair switches from red to blue, and he reflects that the one night in his life when he remembers being truly happy is a night where, in the book, it's specified that this is in Portsmouth, where he meets a group of sailors who just accept him as himself and they hang out all night, but there's no expectation of sex or anything. And in the conclusion, he talks about, I guess we're almost up to what the present day is, where he talks about how he's dressed has just become how young people dress in late 60s Britain. And then some little boys accost him in the park and tell him that they're going to tell the cop over yonder that he asked to look at their private parts or something unless he gives them some money. And then he makes this beautiful speech about that they cannot hurt him and that he is now one of the stately homos of old England.
It's a really unsentimental ending, and at the same time, like, also a delightful one, because it doesn't seal everything off like neatly, because he's still living life at this point and still like dealing with the daily nonsense of being a gay man in a world that is sort of like, what do we do about this? And it's kind of amazing though to think about like all that he inspired.
So in 1967, homosexuality was decriminalized in Britain. That's the year before the book comes out. So really, like, too late to have that much of an effect on his life. And he subsequently moves to New York, where he gets a lot of free dinners. He does a one-man show. He continues to write books. And he's sort of an institution in and of himself. He plays Queen Elizabeth in the movie Orlando.
Yes. When he's quite old at that point, too.
Yeah.
Because that came out, what, in 92? As I said, like, raconteur as a job title is kind of a dream. I feel like we don't have any Andy Rooney's and Quentin Crisps. And also, I think Truman Capote kind of became a raconteur later in his life because he didn't write anymore. So he just would show up on talk shows. This was a treat. It was a lot of fun, and also just something that I don't know if I would have sought it out without this show. So what a delight this was.
So I guess there's a little bit of awards talk this week.
There is a little bit of awards talk. So John Hurt won a BAFTA television award, which is essentially the British Emmys, for his performance in this. He was a steady working actor for over a decade at that point. This really kind of broke him out as an actor and made people know who he was and put him on the map. And as we know, the rest is history there in terms of the other roles that we saw him play not long after that. Everything from in Alien to, as I mentioned, Heaven's Gate to The Elephant Man. He worked his whole life. And did get married 4 times, which is a lot.
So, choice dialogue, I mean, it's Quentin Crisp, so he's a quote machine. But the thing that I wrote down was, there's something that he says that I think ought to be a UN resolution, which is, Poland is not so much a country as a disturbed state of mind.
No lie.
And now, Sarah, did you have anything?
Oh, I agree with you. The whole thing was quotable. And my favorite line was one that I already mentioned, which was, I discovered my vocation in life, exhibitionist and martyr.
Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher about how we score movies?
We rate movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films, but specially tailored to specific issues in biopics. Do you want more details on how we score movies? Please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
Sarah, would you like to go first?
Yes. Outward appearances, 9. Acting and casting, 9. Passage of time, 5. Costuming, 7. Quality of the script, 7. Accuracy, 9. Storytelling, 7. Production value, 7. Production direction, decision making, 7. And do we care, 8.
Okay. So, for outward appearances, makeup and hair, I gave it an 8.5. For acting and casting, I gave it a 9. For passage of time, I gave it a 7. For costuming, I gave it a 7.5. For quality of the script, 7.5. Accuracy, 6.5. Storytelling, was it cliched? Was it interesting? Was it inventive? I gave it a 7. For production value, 6.5. For production direction decision making, 7. And for do we care, I gave it an 8. So, Sarah, my total came to 7.45. What's yours?
My total came to 7.5.
The Naked Civil Servant. Your total score comes to 7.475. You did not earn a second opinion, but we liked you very much, and you are a worthwhile use of an evening, which we do not mean as faint praise here.
No, not at all. Anything that you would recommend?
Reading the book version of The Naked Civil Servant is fun. It is a very fast read, and it is, every other sentence is a quotable epigram, but it all comes together to tell his story. And for God's sake, please watch the first 5 minutes of another Philip Mackey production. Well, Philip Mackey writes the script for this. Verity Lambert is the producer. But, I mean, on, I guess, Philip Mackey, who is credited on The Naked Civil Servant, went on to work on lots of other historical BBC productions, including what I'm recommending here, which is please watch at least the first 5 minutes of the BBC's The Cleopatras, if you can find it, because it is insane.
Yes, it is insane.
Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree with all those recommendations. And I would also just say Heaven's Gate is an always recommend for me.
If you want to learn about the life of the Emperor Caligula and are too lazy to read, go watch John Hurt's episodes of I, Claudius, because they are much more watchable, even with the production standards of 1970s British television, than Caligula, the subject of the lost third episode of this podcast.
Before we go, we have to apologize for something we said in a previous episode that turned out to be misinformation, and we are sorry for this.
We were wrong. Sometimes we're wrong.
Rena, what were we wrong about?
I need to correct the final score from episode 55, The President's Last Bang. Ryan Estrada's score for The President's Last Bang last week came to 8.7 when I added it up manually, not 8.3, which was our guesstimated average, which brings the total average for The President's Last Bang up over an 8 to 8.0167, which means that The President's Last Bang did earn second opinion.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and it's always fun to hear people make fun of bad reviews for good movies and good reviews for bad ones.
Excellent. Any other mistakes? I think we were otherwise perfect.
I think we're otherwise perfect.
So, a note on our show and Patreon. Our podcast baby has matured, and we have launched a Patreon simply in effort to defray some of the costs associated with bringing our show to you, platform hosting costs, recording costs, and research costs. And we occasionally have to order a book off the internet, and we sometimes have to pay for movie rentals. We are offering, at this time, shout-outs and access to our awful first 3 episodes to anyone who chips in for us. And with that, we'd love to thank Gates, who signed up already.
I made those first 3 episodes available as an add-on for subscribers, not to squeeze anyone for money, but because they're terrible. Really, the only conditions under which anyone should listen to those episodes is if they already love the show and want to know what we sounded like when we were starting off, not as a thing that you listen to first.
So with that, if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is @BiopicAPodcastStory, so do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Please also check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official episode ratings for all of the movies that we've done so far. And if you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about Battle of the Sexes, starring Emma Stone, not Emma Roberts, as Billie Jean King.
Indeed. I'm looking forward to watching this one.
Yes. I am hoping that it turns out to be on my airplane. Otherwise, I'll be shelling out that $3.99 again.
I did actually watch this once over the shoulder of a person on an airplane.
If it was available on the plane and looked good, why didn't you just put it on your own screen instead of watching over the shoulder?
I don't recall. I think I was watching something else, but I kept glancing over at the other screen.
Stuff always looks better on someone else's screen anyway.
I was probably watching Scarface or something like equally inappropriate on my screen. Anyway, well...
Good night to the earnest and the cynical.
Good night. Good night, Rena.
Good night, Sarah.